Hello everybody, yeah, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around we are in Doom Reach playing as the forces of the Vampire Counts against the forces of the Dark Elves. And based on a recent request or suggestion, we are going to be running a mass flyer build. Now, obviously it's not a full-on flyer build because well, first of all, there's a rule that you have to have ground units, otherwise you start losing leadership, which in the case of Vampire Counts would result in some pretty quick crumbling, and it's probably a disaster. But also, because I do think that you just need a few ground tools to deal with certain things, and so that's what we've kind of rolled with. But it is mostly flyer build. And to make it happen for my lord, I'm rolling with Manfred von Karstein. Not necessarily the most optimal or competitive build necessarily, keep that in mind, of course. But with Manfred von Karstein here, we do get Spirit Leech as well as Fate of Buna. The main reason for Fate of Buna is because I was very concerned about facing off with Blackguard, because Terrorgeist Breath's a bit of an unreliable counter, and obviously Terrorgeist, Vargeist, and Bats are not going to be killing Blackguard. We will be having another counter to those in the form of the Mortis Engine, but still, I'd like to have some harder counters. Spirit Leech is there to counteract enemy heroes, chip away at cavalry if needed, something like Cold One Knights, that sort of thing. They can definitely do some good work. Fate of Buna also, I should mention, against Witch Elves. So while it might seem like overkill, and kind of is for an 800 gold, or in the case of the Sisters of the Singing Doom, only 1050 gold unit, due to their loose formation, they're often hard to kill with a breath attack, and they're stupidly dangerous to Vampire Counts because of how easy it is to rampage, and then if you start doing damage, perma-rampage, essentially, Vampire units. Invocation of Nehek is there as well, of course, for the heals, as well as our Raised Dead summon, because we need to disrupt enemy troops, Master of the Black Arts for Winds of Magic, and Sword of Unholy Power for Winds of Magic regen. Up in the sky alongside him, we do have two Terrorgeists. This is our anti-large contingent. You'll often see a Charybdis or sometimes even like the Chill of Santa or Hydra in this matchup, so I figured Terrorgeists would be good. Plus, they will counter things like Cold One Knights, Dread Knights, that sort of thing. And let's be honest, you're likely to face at least some of those units in this matchup. And Vargeist's not really the most reliable counter to him. As a support tool, we do have Vargeist, though. These guys will beat up on the squishy vampire or squishy Dark Elf troops. They have a lot of melee attack, very high weapon strength. Not the greatest charge bonus or anything, but they do have Frenzy. And the Devil's Shorts off and actually bring their own terror. So it's going to be pretty cool. We're going to be trying to crump enemy backlines, dish out some hurt if my opponent brings squishy infantry, that sort of thing. And honestly, even against like Hargoneth Executioners, these guys have an alright AP ratio. I believe it's like 30% or something of their damage. Yeah, about 30% of their damage is AP. Alongside that, we finally have a lot of bats, and this is, in my opinion, critical to make the strat work. You need backline disruption, and if we're not bringing hounds or heavy cavalry, Vargeist, they can do the job okay, but ultimately, I think something like Fellbats is absolutely mandatory, especially to block off enemy spearmen and units like that from interfering with our flyers. On the ground, it's simply a horde of chaff, 3 units of zombies, the Tithe, Skeleton Spears, as well as the Mortis Engine here. The Mortis Engine, absolutely critical. If my opponent brought a Doom Blob of like 5 Blackguard or something, this would be absolutely indispensable. You can't get by without it, essentially. So it definitely had to make an appearance. Now for my opponent here, he has decided to go with an unconventional build, and I'm not sure how necessarily competitive it is. For his lord, he is rolling with Malekith on foot, so a bit of a safety pick there, I suppose. He's got an interesting spell selection. He's got Chill Wind for the slows, and I suppose damage to infantry, and then Blade Wind, which of course can mulch blobbed up infantry pretty effectively. The problem is that my build here is not very heavy on the infantry, so besides the bats, I don't know what he can target, really. My most expensive infantry unit is 350, the Spears. He also does have Stand Your Ground to keep his troops in the fight, and Gaze of Malice, of course, for the disruption. No Soul Stealer, which is a little surprising. I think it's kind of a critical choice on Malekith just to keep him alive, but we'll see how he performs here with his Blackguard defending him. Now, besides that, for my opponent's front line is a bunch of cheap troops, a bunch of Dread Spears, backed by a single unit of Blackguard, and then a lot of shooting. And this is definitely a bit unusual. You don't see this very often when you're fighting against the Dark Elves. That said, mass shooting is one of those things that, weirdly enough, can sometimes work against Vampire Counts, especially more conventional builds. Vampire Counts often struggle to shut everything down, especially with the nerfs to summons. So he does have a Bolt Thrower, 5 units of Vanilla Dark Shards, as well as the Raven Heralds up in the sky. And it is worth mentioning, Raven Heralds, for some ungodly reason, can hide in the woods. This is something literally no other flying unit can do. Not even the Wood Elf ones, I'm pretty sure. But for some reason, these guys can. So I actually didn't know any of this was here. Obviously, I did a quick head count. Knew that my opponent had something hiding, but I had no way of knowing these guys were over there. Finally, my opponent does have some Dark Riders as well as Dark Riders with repeater crossbows here on the flank. The Dark Riders, of course, they're to zone. I think Dark Riders with repeaters are probably the better way to go than Dark Shards. I think you could probably ditch most of these guys and swap them out for Dark Riders with repeaters and you'll be in a much better position. But regardless, this is what my opponent went with. And you can see here we're going for a surround. Now, I do get jumped by the Raven Heralds here because I didn't see them. And so we were going to pull back here. I don't want to lose my Fellbats too soon. Like, they are a cheap and throwaway unit, but losing a cheap and throwaway unit for nothing is a really big misplay. So we're going to fall back here, hide in the trees, and sit tight and wait. And these guys are actually regenning now because they're close to the Mortis engine, so that's going to be helping them at least for a little bit before the Mortis pulls away. Bolt Thrower is going to fire up at Manfred, doing a little bit of chip damage there. So I'm going to pull back. I'm basically just trying to wait and get my infantry into position. I don't want to be hasty here. Dark Elf, the single Bolt Thrower is not putting enough pressure on me to make me rush, and the horde of Dark Shards here is not the biggest threat. And in the meantime, my opponent is definitely making a bit of a misplay, in my opinion here, because he's pushing forward with his Dark Shards. He should really be trying to sit tight. He should be spreading out his infantry to cover all angles. Like, you can obviously see my infantry line is trash, so you can basically just zone that off with like 2 spearmen, and because they're slow and trashy. And then try to cover your flanks. But regardless, we're going to start taking some volleys here into our poor spearmen, though. Who really cares? They're skellies. They're meant to die. They were made to suffer. So they're pushing forward here. My opponent does pull back with the Black Guard, and Malekith, I believe, will start moving shortly. The Skelly Spears here will take a bit of pounding, but who really cares? And we are starting to make a pass. Now, I do believe my opponent had his troops on skirmish mode, and this is going to be a bit of a mistake. I'm not actually sure if they were in skirmish mode or just moving, but they do start flexing away. And we are going to drop a summon immediately on the Reaper Bolt Thrower. Skeletons, zombies going down. The bats here are starting to take some fire from the enemy Dark Shards, and and Manfred is now going to be diving into the Raven Herald. So these guys were definitely not on skirmish mode. They're going to get caught here in a bit of miss micro from my opponent, and now you can see we're just kind of collapsing from all sides. So if we take an overarching look of the battlefield, we zoom in a little bit, you can see how we're coming in from all sides. We got my infantry and the Mortis engine coming in from over here, looking to start melting that infantry. Vargeist diving in here into the back line, shutting down this pocket of Dark Shards that were separated from the main blob. And that was something I think my opponent was trying to do intentionally, was separate so I couldn't shut everything down at once. But now these guys are isolated, getting nuked by the Vargeist. Over here, Manfred is shutting down the Bolt Thrower with zombie summons. Manfred is destroying the Raven Heralds. And down here on the ground, the bats are shutting down the Dark Shards, and we're going to have bats chasing after those Dark Riders. So it's a huge surround here. And the Terror guys, seeing a bit of a cheeky opportunity, are going to dive in on the Dark Riders, who are meant most likely as a zoning tool. And obviously, these guys will not enjoy fighting Terror guys at all. That's going to be a pretty quick solution there. Now, the Raven Heralds here are going to rout. They're not going to last very long against Manfred and melee. That's not really their forte. And so they're going to get decimated and flee. I guess not that as quickly as I thought. There we go. But losing 8 models, they do decide to rout. Same thing over here. You can see the Dark Shards getting overwhelmed by the Vargeist, and we used our bats. You can see the zone away the Dread Spears. So my opponent is losing all this firing line. Balance of power already swinging in my favor, and the Mortis engine anytime just plowing through and running away from the Hydra. So this is one of the big reasons to bring a Hydra in this match, is to zone away a unit like a Mortis engine. But my opponent here actually kind of ignores it. I guess he was trying to get on the Terrorgeist, or perhaps try to defend this flank. But because of that, the Mortis is just going to keep draining. And Elves are honestly like the best target for Mortis engines, because fact of the matter is Elves only have, well, Elves have the lowest HP pools in the game in general. There are a few units that have like lower HP, but not many. And so yeah, we're going to be able to whittle them down. Unfortunately, the Breath Attack here doing very little to the War Hydra, and I'm speculating that this is because of its physical resist, or sorry, missile resist, because it's 35% missile resist stacked on the armor. I assume the Terrorgeists just don't get as much damage as I would have liked. But either way, Mortis is draining the backline. Vargeist jumped away from the Dark Shards they were beating up on to disrupt these Dark Shards here in the center. The Bolt Thrower is now gone, and here in the backline, Bats harassing and shutting down the Dark Riders. Now, I believe the Bats might actually lose this fight in the long run, but it doesn't really matter. We're just here to shut these guys down for good. These bats over here shattered the Dark Shards. Manfred has actually pursued the Raven Heralds off the field. The Dark Riders are sitting here in the woods. And now it's simply clean up in Aisle 9. The Mortis engine is just draining this entire pocket. The Blackguard trying to get in here and save their friends against the Vargeist. But because of that, they're going to get caught by the Mortis effect as well. Blade Wind actually cuts through them, which is really brutal stuff there. Some friendly fire. And the Terrorgeists are now beating up on the War Hydra. So definitely some good stuff there. The infantry, you can see here, so this was a bit of a miss micro on my part, but also just shows how many issues you have with zombies trying to get surrounds. They're just very slow. So here the Tithe and the zombies are getting bogged down by a single unit of Dread Spears, and really, these guys could be like trying to flank over here, shut down these Dread Spears, but by the time they get anywhere, it's zombies. It takes forever. But the Mortis Engine draining all the troops here. These guys losing that 12 damage a tick, and like I said, it's a lot for Elves. We did get a nice Invocation of Knack to heal all these guys up, and now Manfred is coming back for Fate of Buna on the Blackguard, because at this point, these guys are the last real bastion here, and although they probably won't be able to carry the day, they are still a threat, and they're going to be a nuisance, because they do have immunity psychology, their leadership is insanely high, and so we do hit them with the Fate of Buna. I actually didn't realize that Malekith didn't have Soul Stealers, so if I had knew that, I probably would have focused him with Spirit Leech instead, but that is going to be game, and all cheer up for the Dark Elves. Now, obviously, my opponent's build there was not the most competitive. His responsiveness was not necessarily the best, I'll admit it, but I did want to sort of test out the build. It was very difficult to even get a match where I could really use the flyer build. One of the problems was that basically everybody I squared off against immediately swapped to lizards the moment I tried to run vampire counts. And as much as I'd like to run an all-flyer build against lizards, that is just a quick way to lose down, especially at the moment. So that's not happening. And this was the first matchup where I saw an opportunity to really get a shot at these this flyer build. Now, as if you do want to make a competitive flyer build with vampire counts, though, I do think this is the way to approach it. In some matchups, like for example Empire, I think you can actually pull it off a bit more safely. You don't even need a Mortis Engine against Empire. So the Mortis Engine, that's part of the problem with Dark Elves or Chaos. You can't really afford to go with all flyers or super heavy on flyers because you do need to have a Mortis Engine. You need something to crack that potential elite infantry spam. Like Terrorgeists, even with their breath attacks, the Devils of Schwarzhof and the Vargeists, that sort of thing, will not break a Blackguard blob. So Mortis Engines are needed there, and that's why we brought them here. Obviously, I didn't want to bring like Graveguard with Grave Weapons because that kind of undermines the whole purpose of a heavy flyer build. But like, you need to bring a lot of them to make that work, and then you run out of points. But I felt that a Mortis Engine would definitely be a nice way to go. But if you're going against like Empire or a faction that's a bit flimsier, Beastmen, obviously. Well, the Beastmen are just bad against vampire counts in general. But if you're going against factions like that, you can definitely pull off a very flyer-heavy build. You could probably ditch like the Mortis Engine entirely. Honestly, probably ditch the Skeleton Spears and just get like another 2 units of Vargeists in there. And you'd have a pretty brutal death ball in there. Obviously, you still need some ground forces just to disrupt, well, partially to distract your opponent a little bit at least, but more importantly just to fulfill that units on the ground requirement. Otherwise, I guess you'd need an immediate zombie summon, which is burning through your Winds of Magic, which you don't want to do in my opinion. Especially with the new way summons work, like with the fact they no longer just degenerate, with the fact they just insta-die after a little while. You definitely don't want to be relying on summons. But I do think that this sort of build against, especially against like Empire, Beastmen, I'm trying to think of what other factions. Skaven. Originally, my opponent here had actually selected Skaven, so I was going to go into that. And against Skaven, you could definitely pull off a super flyer heavy build, in my opinion. Like obviously, Giselles and Rattling Guns are dangerous, but they're expensive. And they're relatively easy to shut down with masses of flyers. Like, you can just tie them down with bats or drop summons on them or YOLO in with Vargeists and shut them down and get them off the field. And once they're gone, the rest of the Skaven force is usually at your mercy pretty easily. And and a lot of the Skaven counters to these big flyer builds are not the best. Like, their foot counters, they have like Rat Ogres, which are super squishy. They're actually super vulnerable to Vargeists. Doom Wheels and Doom Flares are obviously not very good against, like, they'll crush bats, but they're not going to do great against the Devils or Schwarzhof or Terrorgeists at all. Terrorgeists can decimate them. And same with Hell Pit Abominations. The low armor on Hell Pits does make them a bit susceptible to units like Vargeist. But the other factions where I would consider this like more competitive. But obviously, if you just want to have fun, you can pull it off against like Dark Elves, especially if you've got like a Dark Elf build like this one, which is not necessarily the most competitive. My critique for my opponent, besides the fact that this build itself isn't that competitive, like if I was going for a more competitive build, I'd probably suggest going for melee heavy comp, and then bring a bunch of Dark Riders with your crossbows to deal with Mortis Engines. Maybe a caster with Fireball. I actually prefer Morathi in this matchup because Morathi has insane melee attack debuffs, and that's really powerful against Vampire Counts who don't have much melee attack on most of their units. But I'd probably bring a double caster build. Bring Wrathy, bring a fire caster with Fireball. You can also bring Death Hag with the Chill Blade, which is another -5 melee attack. You can drop Vampire Count's infantry, on some cases, to 0 melee attack without any magical debuffs. It's literally just your AoEs. It's pretty insane. But that would be my recommendation. I don't think the Hydra's that good here. I think you're better off with a Charybdis. But if you are going to go for a Mazdaka build, I think you got to be more flexible. I think you got to be quicker to respond with your Dread Spears. You can't just let your Dark Shards spread out your Dark Shards and hope that's going to be enough. Probably you'd also want more mobile defense. Like here, we only really had the Dark Riders, which is not and kind of the Hydra, but in my opinion, you just need more mobility. Cold One Riders, that sort of thing. Malekith on a Cold One to really help shut down all those bats. Though, like I said, I just don't think the mass shooting is that valuable here. Especially for Dark Elves. Dark Elves is obviously the most chaffy of the elf factions, but compared to someone like Empire, with Empire you can sometimes bring a very wide build just because Empire has so much cheap trash they can put on the field. You can bring, like, for the price of a Blackguard, you could bring 2 Halberdiers. For the price of 2 Dread Spears, you can bring 3 normal spears. So if it was an Empire player here, you could easily get, like, almost double the width. You could have 2 and then 6. You could have 8 units for the 5 that my opponent had here, and that makes it much more viable to go with these super wide derpy builds. Plus, handguns are just a much more flexible shooting unit than Dark Shards are. But that's just my 2 cents. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you find it entertaining. No, it wasn't necessarily the most competitive, but I did want to highlight it. Try to get that flyer build in. If you enjoyed, if you find it entertaining, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and share. If you have any comments, criticism, questions, requests, as usual, don't hesitate to put them down below, and I'll do my best to respond as soon as I can. I do thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.